episode 5 of our Trauma Informed Talk, or our discussions. And this time we're talking about, again, skills for stabilization, but this is part 2 on this. So let's just kind of get right on into it. And again, there have just been so many things that we have gone through that it's exciting. It's exciting to talk about this. It's exciting to bring the trauma talk out from the dark and into the light, and be able to really look at this. I mean, we all have trauma. We all have things that have impacted us in our lives, but some people have it in a way that impacts their life in such a way that you become stuck. And we don't want that anymore. We want to be able to help you, family advocates, you people who work with the family advocates, and just anyone, be able to hear this conversation, be able to see it, understand it, know it, lean into it, and work with other people who are dealing with this. So I'm glad you're here with us. I'm glad we get to have this conversation. We're almost through it, and let's just get right on in with the goals. And really, why don't you go to your coaching conversations with Patrice and Liz folder and just kind of go through that, read it. You can read our bios. You can read just whatever other information and handouts that Mara has provided for us to give us a deeper understanding of the discussions we've had. Go through those and explore those yourself. And let's just go right on over to you, Liz.
Yeah, I'll second what Patrice is saying of really using that resource in its entirety. If you're just joining us on this one, please don't. At least watch the one before, because that is the part 1 to this one. And Patrice and I are human, so if we told you to start here, tell us that past Liz knew that wasn't a good idea and start on the one before. And then on the one before, you'll get to meet my cat, and then today you're meeting my snake. So it's really worth it to go back and see all the fun we've had. It's really been actually coaching with Liz, Patrice, and pets.
And my laugh attacks you'll enjoy too. So you really don't want to miss any of that.
Yeah, we have Lala's feature. So, I mean, it might be worth just going back anyways. So on this one, really what we're going to focus into is, and Mara's going to explain it even deeper, but we're going to be looking at how do you step back into your window after such a time of crisis. So again, we're talking about a family who you show up as an FA to your visit. One of the older children, who's not necessarily your client, is in a very extreme episode of self-harm. The other kids in the family are present, and most of the adults are only engaged with our kiddo who was self-harming and in a moment of crisis. And what does that look like? How do you stabilize this family? How do you stabilize yourself so that you can be of aid to this family? And then from there, how do you recognize your own trauma? How do you recognize what you're bringing in with this family? How do you honor their intersectionality? And how do you work with it? How do you recognize its importance and do right by this family? And then, what is your role as an FA? And in the last one, we're fairly transparent about the fact that in a situation like this, there's not an outline. There is no cookie cutter answer of what it looks like, or even what reporting looks like, right? In a serious time of crisis, as an FA, a very comfortable place to go is, okay, what's procedure? What's protocol? Do I need a report? I'm a mandated reporter. Where does this fall? And in the last one, and I'm sure again in this one, we're going to talk more about the intricacies of that, and that there's no straight answer, and that's okay. And that in a situation like this, that's probably how we want it, and that's probably where we're strongest, is when we don't have a white or black way of thinking about it. So Mara, do you want to get us into maybe a little bit more of the review, what people for sure need to remember from the last time, and where we're going today?
Yeah, today we're really building on these conversations we've had. So I'll underscore that you may find, if you're just jumping in, that there are some concepts that aren't making sense, and you might want to go back and review some of the handouts that we've provided, because we're going to be diving into the skills that help us stabilize. So in our last conversation, we talked about Judith Herman's 3-stage model for trauma recovery, and that specifically this family and many of the families that we work with are needing to address just feeling safe, stable, and secure in their lives. And that is really the first phase, the first step in recovering from trauma is stabilization. And so we're going to talk today about what that looks like in practice. And we're going to talk about that through the lens of the window of tolerance, which is something that we've talked about again in the first episode and referenced a few times, because the window of tolerance is really a way that we understand what happens when we experience a trauma trigger, what happens when we've experienced a lot of trauma, and how that affects our nervous systems over time. So the window of tolerance is this metaphor that brings it all together and helps us understand the goals of treatment and how to move forward. So I want to review that really briefly again. Some of you may already feel really familiar with it, but just to help us get into this conversation on how we stabilize, you have a handout again, so you'll want to refer to that. It looks like this. It has this little brain on the front that says triggered. And I'm actually going backwards. I'm going to start on the second page on this window of tolerance piece. So I want to talk again and remind us that the goal of stabilization is to recognize when we're out of our window and to learn the skills, resources, and tools that we need to get us back in our window. We all go out of our window when we get triggered, right? When we get overwhelmed by something, when our brain detects some indication in the environment that I'm unsafe, right? We get triggered, we go into these survival responses. We go into a fight, flight, freeze response. Our fight, flight response is going above that window into our hyper aroused place, right? This is when our nervous system no longer feels safe, and we move into, how am I going to fix it, right? What am I going to, I'm going to fight, I'm going to do something to fix this situation, right? I'm going to go into an automatic response that will help me fix it. We often feel very anxious and sort of this frantic feeling when we're in that hyper aroused place. If that doesn't work, or if we have this experience of the best thing to do is for me to just get small, get quiet, and get through it, because when I try to fight, when I try to get away, it doesn't work, or I get more hurt, then we start to go into this hypo-aroused place. That's the bottom here. This often looks like dissociation, right? So kind of disconnecting from ourselves. We can start to feel a sense of like not being in our body or not feeling real. This is an automatic response that actually is really meant to keep us safe, right? When we're overwhelmed and there's nothing we can do to fix it, save energy, shut down, disconnect, get through it, right? Over time, when we've experienced a lot of trauma, our window gets quite small, right? A lot of things can send us out of our window and make us feel unsafe, because there's a ton of things that are associated with trauma for us that trigger us, right? And so our window gets quite narrow. And the first piece of that stabilization is to be aware of what it feels like when you're in that window and what it feels like when you're not, right? Then you can start to identify, oh, okay, this is me starting to move. I'm starting to feel my anxiety rise, starting to feel myself kind of get panicked and like I need to control a situation. This is what hyperarousal feels like, right? So being able to identify, am I in hyperarousal? Am I in hypoarousal? The awareness is the first piece of stabilization, right? And then once we know where we're at, we can start to learn what works for us in getting back in the window. What does it mean to get back in the window? Help my nervous system feel safe again, right? So that I can bring my full brain back online. Because what happens, and this is a bit of a review, but what happens when we get triggered is the parts of our brain that I touch here, because this is the prefrontal cortex, and the more evolved parts of our brain that help us have really great ideas and analyze things and think through, that goes offline when we're triggered. We very much are going to rely back here on our older reptilian brain. It's part of the brain that's just automatic. It's in charge of breathing. It's in charge of heart rate. It's in charge of all these the autonomic nervous system, right? And we start to rely on that when we get triggered. So learning when we're triggered so that we can start to have more awareness, bring our full brain back online, and use some skills to re-regulate is really the goal of the stabilization. And, sometimes naturally through that process, we start to widen our window, but not necessarily. We may be still easily triggered, but we know what to do so we don't get as freaked out, right? So that's sort of the basic what we want to talk about today. What does that look like? What are the options when I'm hypo-aroused? What are the options when I'm hyper-aroused? And just generally, I want to name, and we're going to get more into these, but we really have two options. It's pretty simple. I can either lean in to what's triggering me, or I can get away from it, right? And there's good reason to do both. So usually, if we're hyper aroused, we're anxious, we're distressed, we want to try to figure out how to lean into it, right? How to just get closer to the thing that's scaring us so we can investigate whether or not it's actually safe, right? Because the very nature of being triggered is that we feel unsafe, but we're not, right? When we're truly unsafe, we want our automatic responses to take over. If I all of a sudden have a tiger walk into my office, I don't want to overthink that. I want to do whatever my autonomic response is. I just want to go into whatever that automatic survival response is, because that's going to be the best way, right? I trust my brain to know that. The problem is, if I constantly feel like after that a tiger is going to walk into my office, I won't be able to focus, right? I'm going to constantly be, there's going to be a tiger coming, right? Oh my gosh, there's a tiger coming. So if I'm hyper aroused and I'm feeling that, oh no, a tiger might come, I'm freaked out, and I can recognize, oh, I'm triggered right now. I'm anxious. I'm scared because I've had a tiger walk in before, and that's scary. How do I lean in and investigate this a bit, right? How do I lean into being scared and just learn to sit with it? I'm scared. I've had this happen to me before. I'm leaning in, right? If I'm hypo-aroused, if I'm so freaked out that I can't even feel my body anymore, that I'm just like numbing out and dissociating and disconnecting and feeling kind of in a trance, then I actually need to figure out a way to lean out of what's distressing, get away from what's triggering, so I can feel safe enough to get back into my body, right? So this is where we're going to use some of the healthy distraction to re-find our grounding and some sense of safety. We're going to get more into both of these options, leaning in, leaning away, and when to do each, and how we can use this for ourselves, and then also how we could use this for our family that we're talking about here. But I want to just bounce some questions back to both Patrice and Liz. First, what are some safe and healthy options that FAs are already using to help family explore these skills? Like, what are some of the ways that you're already teaching families how to either lean in or lean away?
First, I have to address the the reptilian brain. Now, if you're asking me if I would lean out, I would run out. If UFAs,
what a fitting time for Honey to make her appearance.
Liz has got a reptile.
Listen, Patrice and I are all about modeling for y'all how to do what we expect. So yes, here we are.
Yes, so now we can answer the question because the reptile in the room has been addressed. Anyway,
a little tiger.
Please, the reptile just distracted me. Just give me the question one more time.
No, so what does that look like right now? How is your program teaching people these coping skills? What are some examples of what's already being done?
Well, I think we have the opportunity to talk with each other. I remember when we were all together and we were doing home visits, we had that time together in our office to be able to laugh through it, talk about it, maybe even, I mean, and it doesn't sound right, but sometimes you would go through your cases and you talk about the families. You had to get out what you were feeling, what you were going through with those parents in order to be able to go back out and deal with them. So we would talk with each other, we would process with each other. So I think having that time, I think having our monthly meeting with our mental health therapist helped a lot out because he understood, he heard, he's been with us for a long time. So I think having that, and again, all the other people in our lives, our supervisor and people like that, but just being able to be real and just say what you feel, just and not feel like, oh, I'm doing something wrong, I'm going to get in trouble for that, but just being able to feel real and get out what's really bothering you, or what you're having a problem with them, or just the fact, oh my gosh, they're not listening, I'm bringing all these wonderful resources. So being able to do that, and then I think just being heard, just being heard, whether they, we're talking about us, whether they could help us or not really, or give us a lot of good resources, and a lot of times they did, but the fact that they heard us and reflectively listened to us and talked with us back and forth, which is what you're saying for us to be able to do with our families, is what we also needed. And that can sometimes just simply be enough. So leaning into us and hearing us.
Yeah, and I think with that too, there is a good level of flexibility of how our FAs right now are currently taking any type of like coping skills or skill teaching in general back to their families. I think that largely we're guided by, the RBCs, how Patrice and I express the circle of security to them, the early learning outcomes. They're structured to keep those things in their brain, right? To see the connection in those things, to use all of these different resources as far as staffing goes, to come back to those things. But within that is that flexibility to figure out how you take coping skills to your family.
Yeah.
Right. And what coping skills they need and what matches, some of the standards and the outcomes that we look to help facilitate for our families. So in terms of, what's already put in place for the FAs to utilize to take things back, it's hard to name just one thing because there is just so much flexibility and how that can look for them.
And they do provide us with trainings and things like that. But I think the fact that we can talk to each other and pick each other's brains about what you're doing, what that person is doing, and then be able to process through it. Because processing, and that I think is the other thing that we have, is the ability to, as coaches, process with them. So they come to us. They bring us their issues and things they need to talk about, not vice versa, us bringing to them what we want to talk about. And then we process through that and then help them to work through. And again, it may not be us saying much of anything. It's just them being able to talk and we helping to organize. But
give space.
Right. But the fact that there is a time to process and apply what you've learned, or apply what you bring to the table, what they bring to the table, and then look at that.
And especially in the socializations too, because I think when, one-on-one with families, you get one version of them, right? And they allow you one degree of access to them, right? Whether it's further than they do in socializations or it's more reserved, it's still a different environment. And so it's equally important when we process our socializations and these larger kind of group settings, because you can see different aspects of your families. That might give you different insight of what coping skills might work for them or how they engage with other people. Is something that you thought you're onto, maybe you've talked to Patrice or I about, I don't know, there's something going on here, but like, I don't have enough data points. I can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it's in the socialization that you see that and you go, that's that's the link, and so Patrice is right. There's so many aspects of this process.
And it's a neutral environment too. It's a fun environment. So where you might be seeing somebody in an office, where you might be seeing somebody in a more professional way, outside or in our socializations, they're able to kind of, as you would say, let your hair down a bit and just
Yeah.
be you. That's where you can also see that other side because we're all multidimensional.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk more about this family and what it would look like to explore stabilization with this family. And so my hope is that we could maybe do some role playing at some point together in this conversation, because I think it will be best for us to actually kind of play it out and let people see what that looks like. So I want to pause for a minute and dive a little bit more into those two options. So come back to the handout only so that we can get back into this conversation and do some role playing and show what that would actually look like. So
well, that also means that people have another chance to just stare at us really quick. So if anyone, if you're watching with a team, if you're watching by yourself, go ahead and pause before we get into this next piece of what Mara is going to teach us and help us conceptualize and explore kind of where we're at this point in the conversation. And then we'll just continue being blessed with listening to Mara and hiding the tiger reptile in the room.
Yes,
her name is Honey, Patrice. She's sweet.
Honey reptile.
Very misleading name for a snake.
Yeah,
so if you're I'm a little triggered by the snake, so this is good. Good way forward. But we're going to be now on this first page here, and I want to talk more about these two options for coping. Right, these two. I have I'm assessing. Right, the first piece is I'm assessing. I'm out of my window. How do we assess that we're out of our window? Well, we recognize that I'm feeling overwhelmed. I don't feel like I know what to do, right? So when we have a sense of overwhelm, I don't know what to do. I can't feel what I'm feeling. It feels like too much, right? Then I'm out of my window. Being in your window does not mean being comfortable. So I want to make sure people realize that I can be in my window. I can be sad. I can be hurt. I can be angry and be in my window, right? As long as I still feel like I have this internal authority over myself, right? I'm really angry, but I'm not moving into automatic responses. I can remain pretty calm even if I'm firm, right? And say, listen, this doesn't feel okay for me, right? So I think about Agnes and I think about Gregory, and they're here very triggered as Candace has just self-harmed, right? And they're both of them showing up in this hyper aroused place, right? They're approaching her, they're freaked out, they're yelling, there's a lot of energy. There's not a calm and collected response. They could, if they were in their window, they might say, I'm worried about you. I need you to step aside with me. I need us to go in the other room together so we can talk. This is not, this is unsafe and we need to stop right now, right? We could be scared. We could even feel really frustrated with Candace. But if we're in our window, we're able to sort of feel this authority over ourselves and we feel like we know what to do to move forward. When we're out of our window, we're just sort of in a panic response and we're just doing whatever we feel like we need to do in that moment to get control over the situation. And we're not really thinking through it, right? So assessing that, right? We're looking for, is there a sense of panic, anxiety, overwhelm? Are we getting really rigid and feeling like we have to fix things, right? That, if we're noticing that in this example in Agnes and Gregory and, in Myrtle and in some of the family that are there, that tells us they're hyper aroused, right? There's this high energy, high anxiety, fight flight response. We can see that and we can usually feel it, right? Now, some of the family might go into hypoarousal, right? We might see Quinn just sort of disengaged. Maybe Quinn's on their phone, right? And just sort of like, whatever, this happens all the time, right? That's a sign of hypoarousal. That's a sign that I am so overwhelmed that I'm disengaging, right? I'm disconnecting. Sometimes it looks like a freeze response, like I don't even know what to do, sort of a deer in the headlights. But for people who have really been in a traumatic environment for a long time, sometimes it just looks like apathy, right? Like disengagement. She always does this, right? She's dramatic. She always does this, right? So our first role as
really quick, Mara.
Yeah.
For our 2-year-old who's technically the client, because we've kind of explored that an FA might, there's comfort in focusing on who your client is. Could all of those, it could look this way, also apply to him even though he's so young?
Yeah. So you might see him crying, right? You might see him screaming or banging on things, right? That would be a sign of hyperarousal. He's acting out. He's trying to, something needs to be done, right? He's signaling, I'm freaked out, I'm overwhelmed. But very often, and something that's kind of can be strange for people, is that young 2-year-old in a traumatic environment might just sort of be calm, right? Or might just sort of like be zoned out, right? You might see a real lack of responsiveness, and where you would expect responsiveness. During 9/11, there were, people freaking out, and a mom with a baby in its carrier, and the baby had fallen asleep. And there is just like insane noise around. And as a defense strategy, the baby goes to sleep. It's overwhelming. And so we can sort of drop out. So sometimes little ones will just like knock out and fall asleep when they're overwhelmed. So you'd see a lot of these same signs, even though it's not verbal. You're looking for these physiological signs of either overwhelmed, hyper-aroused, right? Or the hypo, dropped out, numb, disconnected, right? Okay. So that's your first piece, is I want to know, where are they at? Because I can't bring an intervention until I know what's going on with them, what are their automatic responses. That gives me some indication of what they're needing to cope more skillfully, right? So that's what we've got to understand first, is are they hyper or hypo aroused? Because if I'm assessing they're hyper aroused, then I'm going to do the lean in, right? And in this situation in the home, when this is trauma happening in the moment, right? So we're gonna strategize and safety plan, and we're just gonna get through that moment. So now, if we're looking at a week later, 2 weeks later, we come into the home, and maybe I sit down with the family, and they're really disengaging from each other. There's not a lot of connection. And when I bring it up, they're like, it's fine. We're over it. That kind of stuff happens. Not a big deal. Everyone's fine. And you're noticing that there's just like a real avoidance and disconnection. Then you as the advocate can recognize, okay, so this topic might feel a little too overwhelming right now. Me directly asking them to engage with this might be too much, right? How am I going to find a gentler way to help them lean away while also learning the skills of self-regulation, right? Whereas if you walk in and as soon as you bring it up, you get, Agnes saying, well, I've told her that if she does that again, she's got to be grounded, and we're not putting up with that anymore, and she's just trying to get attention, right? If you get this like real aggressive fight response, then you're gonna want to look at, okay, how do we help her lean into some of the fear that might be coming up for her, right? How do we help calm her by leaning in? So you're gonna want to assess, where are they at? How are they coping, right? And that's when we then move into these skills, right? So the first piece, leaning in. I'm hyper aroused, I'm in fight flight, want to lean in. These are mindfulness skills, right? And imagine you all have talked maybe some about mindfulness. This is about how do I mindfully engage with what I'm feeling to help myself reorient and soothe, right? So this is, instead of distracting from my experience, I try to pay attention and mindfully engage with it, right? So if Agnes tells me, you know, I've told her she's not doing that again, I made her promise we're going to take her phone away, right? She's just in this, we're fixing it, right? We're not allowing it, right? She's hyper aroused, and I might, mindful engagement might look like me saying, Agnes, I'm wondering if that felt scary to you. Like, how did that feel? Because I felt a little scared. I felt scared for Candace, and I've been worried about all of you, knowing that that was pretty upsetting what happened. What was it like for you, right? So I'm asking her, instead of me engaging with the content of what she's saying, I'm recognizing these are attempts to fix, change. You know, she's in this fight mode, and how do I help her mindfully engage with what her experience was, right, and what it still is. We can do, you know, if we're needing a little bit more of a involved engagement, we can do some deep breathing. Our breathing, our breath work is really the only way that we can hack in to our autonomic nervous system. We can't like, well, okay, go ahead. I want you to slow your heart rate down, right? We can't, okay, I want you to make sure, go ahead and make sure that your pupils are not dilated, right? Like we can't control a whole lot of what happens with our autonomic nervous system, but we actually can control our breathing. So it's a really powerful tool in helping to self-soothe, right? So if we notice as we start to bring up the topic, maybe we see that Candace and Jeremiah start to get really freaked out and scared, right? And we see for the kiddos that this hyper aroused response. Let's do some like breathing together, right? Let's do some deep breathing. We can do some square breathing, which looks like breathing in for 4, breathing out for 4. Sometimes we do a pause for 4. So we're really intentionally trying to count and slow and regulate our breathing, right? So we can do that. Sometimes body awareness, right? Helping us. I will often, when I'm listening to someone talk to me about, if I ask Agnes, what was that like for you? And she says, I'm just so angry that she did that. And I might say something like, and if you weren't angry, what would you be feeling, right? And well, I don't know. I'm just so scared. I don't know what to do with her, right? I might just say like, can you just take a minute and be kind to that? Can you even put a hand on your heart? So I coach people into self-touch and grounding through body awareness, right? So I want you to feel the warmth of your hand and just spend a second recognizing that was scary. I know how much you love Candace, and I know how scary that must have been, right? So we can coach into some body awareness. There's also, you can coach people to softly try to find their fingerprint. So I want you to take just a moment and see if you can feel your fingerprint, right? So starting to come back into the body. Self-compassion is really powerful. So helping people access some self-compassion. Saying things like, that must have been really hard for you, right? Or if you hear a lot of story or narrative around self-deprecation, trying to redirect that, right? There's something called a RAIN practice that we can post some resources about, which is helping people self-nurture by recognizing what they're feeling, allowing it, not pushing it away. So recognize I was scared, and I'm going to allow that and investigate it a bit and just notice, oh, my chest feels heavy and tight, right? And then nurture it. Nurture it by saying something like, it's okay to feel this way. It was scary, right? So teaching people self-compassion, self-touch, just even being able to observe your thoughts, sensations, and emotions, slow down and mindfully engage with, what does it feel like as we talk about this again? As we start to talk about what happened last week, what are you noticing in your body, right? What emotions are coming up for you? Anything that we can do to help them lean in to what's happening, slow down, lean in, is going to help them get back in their window, right? So I want to pause there for a minute. I want to talk about the leaning away, but I want to pause and just hear from both of you reactions. How do you see this going with this family? And what might this look like for an FA?
For me, I love this. And I talk about leaning in all the time. And when you talked about and you brought up lean in and then it being a mindfulness skill, and then I put in parentheses, when distracting, I think you might have said distracting. Oftentimes we don't feel comfortable with people's discomfort. So we often try to distract them, whatever that looks like, a joke, oh, you don't feel that way, or, all kinds of ways to distract them and to get them from not feeling in a way that makes us feel uncomfortable. And I absolutely love this because, when you gave us these breathe and grounding through your body awareness and access themselves, I thought to myself, where do you learn that? And now you've got all this family, say we're talking about the young people, the young kids, they grow up, but they still have not learned how to be mindful of their bodies and learn to breathe and get back in touch with themselves. They're only used to people distracting them, so they never learn how to feel what they feel, and understand what they're feeling. So then when they get into other relationships, we can't wonder why they're bringing all this back into now another relationship and just repeating it and never really knowing how to deal with the uncomfortable and the difficult things. We just know how to deal with hard stuff because we've never been in touch and in tune with ourselves and recognizing how we feel, and we just continue to distract. So there's two issues here. Now, we're not helping the people that we're helping to understand, but we're still feeling comfortable with how we feel, and we don't understand. So we just perpetuating all of this. No, I love this. And the whole leaning in, that's all still a part of the circle of security, leaning in. But I don't know that we have had the rest of the story, so to speak, on the mindfulness. So definitely, that's just kind of how I felt. I could see it not just staying in this generation, but in every stage of that person's life, spewing out all those things and never knowing how to connect with themselves or connect with what they were feeling.
Yeah, Patrice, I'm so happy you brought that up, because I think with this family, something you've talked about a lot is just how much room there is for this to be a large generational impact. And then on that same coin, how much space there is for an FA to bring stuff to this family, to bring skills, to even as far back as the first episode when we talked about how do we expect Candace or any of the other kids to know to love themselves when they don't even know what love is from the family unit, right? So just like with what you're saying, how do we expect these kids to grow up, even our youngest kiddos, grow up, be successful in school, then be successful in relationships, then be successful at work, when even from a young age at home, they didn't learn these skills. And I think as an FA, when you recognize that, well, for one, it's not your responsibility that you teach these and then these people are always successful, but that you have an opportunity that because you have the privilege of recognizing this and not being in the same space of fight or flight or trying to exist 100% within this family, it's only when you're in their home that you have to know how to exist with them, that there is a lot of room for you to learn these skills and really learn how to put these things that Mara's teaching us into application.
So I want to talk for a minute about the second piece, coping with hypoarousal, and then we can reflect a bit, and then maybe put this into practice and do that role play. So, if we are too overwhelmed by our internal experience that we're literally starting to dissociate, numb, and disconnect, mindfulness can actually be really overwhelming, right? So it could feel impossible to mindfully engage with, if I'm so overwhelmed that I'm numbing and you ask me, can you take just a moment and tell me what you're noticing in your body? And I might say, I don't notice anything, right? I don't know, I barely feel like I'm here. So I'm going to need to figure out how to help you move away so that we can move back, right? There's this space that needs to be taken from the trigger before we can mindfully engage. So that's teaching people how to lean away from distress, how to distract in a healthy way, in an intentional way, knowing that we always have to come back, right? Or we really solidify these patterns of avoidance and disconnection, right? But that we can't do it so aggressively, that our nervous system is giving us some indication that we're not quite there yet, right? So if I come in and I'm talking to Candace and I'm like, hey, how you doing? Last week was pretty overwhelming, right? And she's just like on her phone and she's like, I don't want to talk about it, right? And I keep pushing, right? I may overwhelm her, right? Or I may get more and more resistance from her. So if I'm noticing this is too overwhelming, she's disengaged, how am I going to help her engage in healthy distraction, right? So an example I had the other day, I was talking to a client and I'm talking to her about something that happened with her dad. And I could see her getting agitated. I can see her getting overwhelmed. And then she sort of shifts and she just like settles a bit, but she's really monotone and she's just disconnecting from me, right? And I notice and say, I noticed that you shifted a bit and it kind of feels like we're talking, but you're not really here. And she's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just I don't really care. I don't really want to even be here, and my response is, well, why don't you tell me about your dog? She loves her dog, and I know that. And I know that engaging and talking about her dog is going to help her come back into the conversation, right? So we're going to do some healthy distraction. We're going to move away. That's going to help her self-soothe. I'm asking her to talk to me about something that's soothing for her, right? So first piece is self-soothing exercises. Sometimes that can look like, let's put on some music, right? Let's listen to something. Why don't you show me whatever your favorite song is that you're listening to right now, right? Or maybe you want to show me a YouTube video that's hilarious. What's the funniest thing you've seen recently on YouTube, right? But figuring out, how do I intentionally self-soothe, right? For her, we were in my office. There was not much to do, but she could tell me about her dog and she instantly changed cadence, right? Her face changed. She found a picture on her phone to show me. I asked her questions about her dog. And as soon as I could feel her nervous system starting to calm down, she was back in her body. She was back in engaging with me. And I said, I know that it's probably hard, but can we take a moment and just come back to what you were saying about your dad? I don't want it to feel overwhelming, but I do think it's important, right? You can always talk about your dog. If the dad stuff gets overwhelming, we can always talk about the dog, but can we come back here? So we've got to help people get back in their experience, learn to self-soothe. This is where things like little fidget toys can come in handy, right? People can hold something in their hands to self-soothe. So our sensory engagement, rather than engaging in the senses related to the trigger, we're trying to move the sensory engagement into some kind of distraction, right? So sometimes I have essential oils that I will give people. I want you to smell that. Find the one that smells the best and tell me what you like about it, right? So that we're just engaging the senses and we're helping them get back into their body in a safe way. We're not directly addressing the thing that triggered them, but we are getting them back into their experience, right? Sometimes that looks like movement. So I'll ask people, even though it's incredibly awkward for them, to stand up and let's just kind of rock together. Maybe we're going to hum, right? And let's rock and let's just feel our bodies move. So I want to get you back in your body feeling safe and not thinking about the thing that triggered you. And once you're back in your body, you're regulated, you're feeling more safe, then I'm going to gently bring you back, right? And see if you can tolerate it. So this can also look like intentional dissociation. This is where like saying like, hey, why don't you put on funny show or something, if you're way too overwhelmed and you're needing to just disconnect, how do we do that in a more intentional way? How do we give myself a little self-care break, right? Intentionally just disconnecting from what's going on. Or I may need to get some support, right? I may need to call a friend. I may need to call a crisis line. I may need to, really help someone help me distract, come up with some skills and tools to get through the moment, right? So these types of skills could be really important for Candace because she's self-harming, and self-harming is a way to distract, right? So I don't know for her why that's working for her, but I know for many people who cut and self-harm, it is such an effective way to sensory soothe. Sounds like crazy to a lot of people who've never self-harmed, but being able to distract the mind from crazy thoughts, from rushing thoughts, from rumination by cutting yourself and feeling the sensations in your body, getting back into your body and focusing your mind is a really powerful way to deal and regulate. So we know that she's making an attempt to do that. And if we can try to understand what's that like for her, how's she using self-harming, and can we teach her some other ways to distract when she's overwhelmed, to engage in her sensations in a different way, then we might be able to support her and actually not self-harming anymore without saying, hey, you need to stop self-harming, right? But trying to understand what's going on with this coping strategy. So these are our two options. And again, I just want to bounce back to you all before we do a role play and actually play out what this would look like. What's coming up for you as you're hearing this? How do you see this looking for this family or for the FAs with this family?
I guess what I see is another tool in the toolbox, really. I mean, there's nothing worse than walking into something like that. It takes you off guard, and who knows what on earth it's triggering in you. You're scared. You don't know what to do. You're thinking, how can I fix this? And I got to fix it right now, but I don't know what to do with this. Mm-hmm. So you're really kind of left, probably needing as much help as the person who's cutting needs. I mean, really, but giving us these tools and these other ways of looking at how we can work with the people, because I like the fact that you say when someone's cutting or doing some sort of self-harm, it's not that they're trying to say, I just don't want to be here anymore. I mean, permanently. I need, there's a bigger issue that I'm trying not to deal with. Mm-hmm. And if we've got other things in our arsenal, our toolbox to help with that, that's great, because now I'm not going there feeling like, what do I do? I've got some things that I can help them with. And then the understanding that self-harm is another distraction, another thing, that there's a bigger picture here that I can't assess right now, but I do see that the cutting is the top of the iceberg, but what is pushing all that other stuff up. So right now, what I need to do is just kind of help this person stabilize the situation, understand there's something more, and then just go from there and lean in.
Absolutely. And I think what I was thinking about a lot, Mara, while you were talking, is for an FA, how scary it would probably be to tell yourself it's okay not to normalize cutting, but not to, completely step into like a clinical view of it, right? To not just completely diagnose it one way, but rather allow space for there to be a deeper understanding that will serve the whole family better, and that will serve that individual better, that it doesn't always need to be so structural and so medical. Because I think that especially in crisis, when you are someone who is in a helping profession, I think a lot of people think the first thing you've got to do is like, not even just harm reduction, like stop reduction, like harm stop. And there is space where someone's not ready for a stop in their heart, and there's so much more growth and work that can be done if you allow yourself to accept that you don't need to fix that or stop that, but that it's okay to just be present, that you're not the end all savior, and that you're really there to work, with the whole family and the individual in crisis as their partner, as someone who's walking their journey with them, rather than a leader or a guidance or anything with that sort of care responsibility.
I think too, you hit the nail on the head too when you said we don't need to be their savior. Many times have I heard that. Many times have I actually named that, and that no, you aren't their savior. And I think again, as we have talked outside of this recording, that we're not here to save. That's not our job. But the system feels like it's set up for us to save people. We've got to have resources. We've got to know what they need to do. We got to be able to refer them to this, and we've got to refer them to that. We got to get the situation taken care of. And
you've got to magically control if they do it. You've got to magically control if they do it once you're out of the home.
Yeah. And get them from point A to point B, and do it soon.
All of a sudden, all of us are Will Smith as the genie. And if you're not, you're a failure. You're not meant for this profession. You're not informed enough. You're not educated enough.
Girl, preach it. Preach. That's the truth. So then we've got a situation for us, and we've got a situation for them, and then we're trying to push all these. So like on that circle of security, all these little circles on it, we're not even on the circle anymore, helping them, being that secure hand. We're out here trying to figure out what we need to do. And we're just so out of our lane, or out of our window, as you would say. So I just think that it is set up like that, but that's kind of how I feel. Yeah, that's kind of what I see.
Well, before we end, I'd like to just kind of show what this would look like. So I'm wondering if one of you would be willing to just take on the role of Agnes, and I'll kind of talk through how I would address this with her. I imagine the FA's first move would be to talk to mom after something like this. So I want to talk through show how I would assess where Agnes is at and how I might use some of these skills with her. Are one of you willing to do that, to be Agnes today?
What do you want, Liz?
Okay, I'll be Agnes.
Okay, great.
Do you have a preference on if I'm hypo or hyper? We'll just see how Agnes is feeling today.
Yeah, how you're feeling. Let's make it authentic. We haven't scripted this, so we're just gonna flow with it, and maybe we'll have some awkward moment, like you might with the real Agnes, and that's okay. We're just gonna flow with it. So
work your Agnes, girl. Work it.
Get ready to be Candace, because who knows, I might call on you.
Hi, Agnes. How are you today?
Yeah, we're really good. I took Anthony to the babysitter. Just been really busy. Quinn has a production after this, so we've really got to end on time, and so that we can all make it to Quinn's school and watch that. So just really busy, but good.
I'm glad to hear that, and I will make sure that we end on time, because I know that's super important. But I do want to just chat with you about what happened last time I was here. I've been thinking about you all a lot, and just thinking about what happened with Candace, and how scared you must have been. So just wanted to check in and see how you're doing, how you're feeling.
Yeah, I think we've been good. We were able to kind of like do a few things, and get some of the mess cleaned up that she caused, and really just kind of put it behind us, and it's kind of been business as usual. And sorry if we scared you, and we certainly didn't mean to stress you out when you have other caseloads. We're not your only family.
We definitely don't need to be sorry. More than anything, I just care about you guys, and I'm glad to hear that you're feeling like things are kind of stable again, it sounds like, but I'm wondering what it was like for you. What's it been like for you just to kind of clean this all up and try to move forward?
I mean, it's just kind of, what a mom does. So we just let her know that when it happens again, we'll just put her in treatment. And that seemed to have kind of stopped, her acting out.
Can you think of any ways that I can support you in this? It sounds like you really want to keep her safe, and that you mentioned putting her into treatment. That sounds like something you probably don't want to have to do. So I'm wondering if we could work together to try to maybe come up with some ways to help her.
Yeah, I guess I just wonder like where Anthony's role is going to be then, because like he's the one that's enrolled with you, and we did, it seems unfair to kind of use you for our whole family, and like unfair to Anthony, and so I don't know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do want to support Anthony. And I think part of supporting Anthony is supporting you and supporting the whole family. So what do you think? What do you think would be helpful right now?
I don't know, because I honestly I don't know what Candace was thinking. I don't know if her friends taught her that. She's never seen it in this house. I don't even know where that came from.
Mm-hmm. What's it like for you right now as I'm asking you about it?
I guess stressful, because there's so many unknowns in that situation, and she won't talk to us. She won't tell us where it came from. She won't tell us if one of her friends taught her to do that, or anything really. Mm-hmm. So it all feels very unknown.
Yeah, that does sound really stressful. I can feel that too. I mean, as I've been thinking about you and thinking about Candace and Anthony and all of you, I've just been thinking, man, that must be really overwhelming, because there aren't any like clear solutions, right? You don't know where she learned this, and you don't know why she's doing it. Have you had an opportunity to have any kind of conversation with her since I last saw you about this?
When we try, she just gets really upset and won't talk to us. Mm-hmm. So I guess we've all just kind of stopped trying. Yeah. And I tried to ask Quinn if she said anything to him, and he won't tell me anything. Mm-hmm.
What's it like for you when she gets really upset like that?
Well, I mean, as her mom, of course, it's sad. I want to be able to support my kids, but it's also frustrating when they won't let me. Mm-hmm. I just feel very stuck. Yeah.
Man, that definitely makes sense to me, because I'm hearing you say, like, I'm sad, I feel stuck, I feel frustrated. It's overwhelming. I wonder if we can just pause for a moment and just kind of honor that as her mom, this is impacting you in a huge way. And that's hard. I feel like you can just be kind to yourself in this.
Yeah, I guess I just don't know what being kind to myself would feel like, because I'm not the one who, like physically had the cuts and had to feel the pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but as her mother and also as a witness, it still impacts you, right? Just like it impacts Anthony, just like it impacts Quinn, just like it impacted me, right? We were all there, we were all scared. It's actually really traumatic to see your child suffering so much. I would imagine it is for most people, right? And I think we could probably work together to try to get unstuck. I don't have all the answers, but I definitely am willing to think through it with you. But I just want to honor that it's scary, and that make some space for how it might have been for you and how you might still be feeling about it.
Well, thank you. And I think it would help if we could talk with Candace too.
Mm-hmm. let's do that. So I'm going to pause there because what I saw, and of course this isn't real, but I think it was really nice to see you sort of wanting to first just move away from it. We're fine. We're not even going to talk about it, right? And then as I'm trying to address it, you kind of clamp down on the, yep, we've taken care of it. We don't want to be vulnerable with you. We don't want to talk about it, right? And my goal is, how do I help you start to connect with how you're feeling? Right. So you can soften to it and open up space to have a real conversation, right? To help you regulate, help you engage with this. So I think that was a really beautiful example because I could feel you start to soften, right? I could feel you start to pause. And even as you were sort of still suspicious of me and what maybe I sound weird, things I'm saying, I can feel your guard start to drop, right? And then we can actually have a conversation about how to support Quinn, right? Or how to support, Candace and Quinn. Or what was that like for you? Or what, and also you, Patrice, what did you observe?
Honestly, this was really kind of real life. I got caught up into it, and I don't know, I could feel you, Liz. I could feel, and I don't know if you were really feeling that way, but I felt your pain. I felt that this was hard for you. I really, really did. And I can feel you and how you were trying to draw her out, Mara. But I really felt you. And I honestly could feel like if there's anybody dealing with any of this, this might be hard for them to watch. But I could feel you.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, because I think that parents have to kick into that defense mode, and that is going to look very hyper aroused. So when we're coming back to a family and trying to be present and participate in their crisis and also their healing, we do need to see that it's not personal. Their push away from you or their excessive pull to you, it's not personal. And it's not a reflection of what you've done well or what you haven't done well. And so when you can separate from that, it's you're able to do good work. Because I know for me, I was thinking like, I'm in this podcast. We're trying to prove a point, but it's also, so trying to manage that. But still, even while it was like, hey, am I being too difficult? Is Mara like, hey, Liz, are we not doing this podcast together? There's still, I could feel from you that it wasn't personal. And that's what we really need our FAs to take away and put in their toolbox.
I agree 1,000%. We can go in thinking, I got all this stuff for you, so let's make some changes right now. And when that doesn't occur, I didn't make it happen. Yeah. What did I do wrong?
Mm-hmm. And I actually think it was such a lovely, it wasn't overly dramatic. I think you did such a good job showing just the real sort of discomfort with the vulnerability of the situation, right? And that of course, you don't want to talk to this person that comes in your house about this really traumatic thing that happened, and you want to seem like you have it all together. And so, starting with just trying to make space for Agnes, just trying to see if you can draw her out a bit with, and if you got super triggered, we would have to manage that, but not being afraid to turn up the heat a little bit, keep coming back, validate what she's saying, but come back to the thing that feels important. So with that,
trust the relationship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with that, we're out of time, and I'll let one of you just kind of take us out and talk about the next steps.
All right, I can go. Thank you, Liz and Mara. I feel like that role play was something that we needed. It helps us to take all the points that we've been talking about in this podcast and all the previous ones, and now put it together. Apply all those things that we have learned and look at it with that family. So I thank you. I know it had to be difficult. Even though that wasn't us, I know that had to be difficult feeling what they were feeling. And again, we need to understand the family. And I think, as I just said, and what we've said, trust in the relationship that you've built in the family to be able to push a little bit, because it's not about us, it's about them and helping them get into a more healing, healthy place. So, with that said, and I want to make sure I say this too, is that um, we need to. Okay, what did I want to say to us? I forget again. Patrice has all these papers. She's written everything down. Okay. Anywho, let's just
Patrice, look, it is worth saying that, role play can be really powerful in learning how you're going to navigate these things. And I know for some people, maybe you've only experienced yourself as hypo-aroused or hyper-aroused. So having to hear the opposite and when you use it might sound like, oh, that's super foreign. So you can always, in your processing time or your time with Mara, your time with Kevin, ask to do that type of role play. You can use the family that we've put out for you guys. That, you don't have to make a whole new family. You can use that and you can seek out this type of role play. Will you learn to practice the skills that may seem more foreign, uncomfortable, awkward, all of those things? Like, because you see me and Patrice, you can be awkward with us for sure. And it's going to just look normal. So
unless she has a snake with her.
I have options. I have large and fluffy. I have scaly puppies, whatever you need.
Thank you. A blooper again. But, sometimes you need to laugh, really and honestly. Sometimes when you walk away from hard things, you have to be able to laugh or do whatever you need to do, maybe distract until you can come back, recognizing that you have to do that in order to be able to function and cope with the things you're dealing with. So with that being said, go to our resources. Mara again gave us some things that we can look at and contemplate on. And again, we'll be back. So you all have a lovely day. Goodbye.